Let me just preface this video by saying the Toronto Raptors are not dead. They're not buried. The season isn't over yet. There's been 6 games played at this point, and probably by the time some of you guys are watching this video, there's been 7 after they finished their game against the Phoenix Suns. But that's clearly not enough to give up on a team, not just any team, a team with championship experience, one of the best coaches in the league, maybe the best head coach in the league. Kyle Lowry, probably a top 20, 25 player in the league, one of the best point guards, the greatest Raptor of all time. Fred VanVleet, like the list goes on. I don't need to go through the whole list of players as my light in the background goes off, which I won't have time to charge, so we're just going to let it go. But I won't go through the whole list of players because, like, you guys know what the Raptors are. If you're watching this, you know the Toronto Raptors have been one of the best teams of the last decade. They're a fantastic team with championship experience and champion players. But at the same time, after a 53-19 record last year, which I think just gets brushed over way too much. This team had the second best record in the NBA. After losing their best player, they had the second best record in the NBA. To me, that's just one of the craziest things to happen in the last several years. Just the fact that they had the second best record in the entire NBA when you've got teams with LeBron, Anthony Davis, and then a team with old, short Kyle Lowry, who's been discredited his whole career, who apparently couldn't win playoff games. He wasn't that guy. He wasn't a number 1 option. He wasn't a number 2 option. And then all of a sudden, he leads a team to 53-19 alongside guys that have been undrafted from the G League. All of these things. I'm not going to get into the whole success story of the Raptors, but let's just give them a bit of credit for what they did last year. It's nothing short of incredible, really. Getting back to the point at hand. I know the season isn't over yet, but they've started 1-5. When you look back at what they did last year, not only did they finish the 2nd seed, but look at this team that finished 8th. They were 20 wins ahead of them. 20 wins. And early into the season, we know damn sure they're not going to be 20 wins ahead of any team in the league, let alone the 8th seed. So it's fair to say there's been a big fall off in performance from last year to this year. And I want to talk about why, the potential reasons, and maybe the potential solutions. But before I even get into that, if you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, like it helps out a lot, probably more than you even think. So doing that would be much appreciated. Anyways, getting back to the point at hand. You're probably expecting me to start by talking about the off-season, taking it back to the off-season where they obviously lost some key players, but I want to take it back just a little bit further. Heading into last year's season, it was expected the Raptors would drop off quite significantly after losing Kawhi, but they didn't, and it wasn't just through one player, it was through a number of players. Norman Powell, Fred VanVleet, OG Anunoby, and namely Pascal Siakam, who got the most attention because it's easiest for a story to be created where Pascal Siakam goes from a good player to an all-star level player and a 23 point per game kind of guy. It just makes sense that he kind of replaces Kawhi, even though it was a team effort, but it's just easier for that story to be created. But I want to stay on the Pascal Siakam topic because I think that's where the downfall of the Raptors so far in the season has evolved from. We've got to take it back to last year's playoffs, the Boston Celtics against the Toronto Raptors. It's fair to say it was a terrible one for Pascal Siakam. He couldn't get anything going, and the biggest thing I think to come out of that playoff series wasn't the fact that they nearly made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. It was the fact that Pascal Siakam might have been found out. Again, I'm not trying to talk in hyperbole and say, oh, Pascal Siakam is at the end for him. Is he not an all-star? Is he a terrible player now? Maybe some of those things are true. Maybe he's never going to get back to that all-star level if he can't turn things around. But more importantly, currently, he's not playing like the player he was last year, and it's because teams have found a blueprint for him. You look at what they did with the Celtics. Jaylen Brown was matched up against him, as opposed to before where they would match up against him with traditional 4s and 5s, bigs, which Siakam was able to exploit because he's fast. He likes to get ahead of steam and drive to the rim. Something that he can do against bigs. People always clowns him for the spin because that was his go-to move. But when you're going up against a 7-foot guy that can't really move laterally, that's a very good go-to move to have. All of a sudden, you switch him onto an athletic 6'7" guy who's giving up a couple of inches, but it's not really a bad thing to have against Siakam because for all these good things that he does, he's not a great post player. He doesn't have the bag that a number of other guys have. And ultimately, we've seen that's been the downfall of him because no longer can he just exploit bigger guys with foot speed. Teams are now starting to put on breeze and undersized 4s onto him, and he's yet to find out how to kind of get around that, which has been a big reason for the Raptors' slow start to the season. When your best scorer and all-star reverts to a pretty average player to start the season, offensively at the very least, you're obviously going to have a significant decrease in play, and ultimately That's been a huge factor. But it's not just Pascal. Ultimately, you added in Aaron Baines, Chris Boucher to the lineup after losing Serge Ibaka and Marc Gasol. I'll admit I was naive enough to think Aaron Baines might be good enough to replace Gasol. I didn't think he was half the player Gasol was, but when you look at how Gasol was trending, which was downwards, he wasn't really shooting the three ball. He was afraid to do it. And Baines, on the other hand, had a career year, a fantastic year in Phoenix. He can defend. He can set screens. He was picking and popping to a degree that we've never seen from him before, dropping 35-point games against the Portland Trailblazers. It was a ridiculous year for Baines. Then he comes to a system like Toronto where everyone seems to get better. I just thought it was a match made in heaven, a match that would see them replace that production and not be left with too much of a hole. But clearly I was wrong, because it's been about 50% of what you got from Gasol and Ibaka, and this has had a knock-on effect on not just clearly the interior protection and the defense, but guys like Pascal Siakam's offense. All of a sudden, with Baines shooting 20% from three, 39% from the field, just woeful offensively, to be honest, it doesn't allow Pascal Siakam to do what he does best, which is attack downhill, because Baines is kind of a non-threat spacing the floor, which means they can collapse on him and get bodies in front of him, which has obviously been a tough thing for Siakam to deal with early on in this year. Now, there are some kind of ways they can combat this. Going small might be a potential option. Siakam at the 5, Boucher at the 5. Boucher's provided some offense. He's taken a jump. He's looked good. Siakam might have the length and the ability, when you have Anunoby, who's got that strength and that defensive ability, overall a good defensive team that might be able to make up for the fact they'd be incredibly small if they ran Siakam at the 5. That might be a potential option to get Siakam going and to get this offense going, because at the moment, they're the 28th ranked offense in the entire NBA. 28th. I just would not have associated Toronto with anything 28th. Defensive rating, offensive rating, just being 28th has shocked me. So that is something that they need to try and address, whether that means getting some more point guard play off the bench, Malachi Flynn, Terrence Davis, going small. Throw anything you can at it at the moment, because nothing's working clearly, and you can't be 28th and make the playoffs in offensive rating unless you're a historic defensive team, which at the moment they're not either, which I have to lead on to, because they're currently the 13th ranked defense in the league, which doesn't seem too bad, but when you consider they've been a top 5 ranked defense for the last 3 years, a reason I think so highly of this team, top 5 ranked defense for 3 years in a row amongst 2 different coaches, 2 different playing groups. This organization's fantastic, but clearly something has gone wrong now. Maybe it's just Ibaka and Gasol. Maybe there's something a bit deeper. The players aren't buying into Nick Nurse's system anymore. Siakam's obviously had his troubles. They can't really create with Lowry off the floor, but that doesn't suggest they should go from being one of the best teams in the NBA to being the 28th ranked offense and an average defense. There's something else going on. This team just isn't really working, and there are options to address that. Like I've said, going small, that does leave them susceptible to offensive rebounds from teams. We saw it with Robert Williams. He was having his say against the Raptors the other day. They've got 2 6'0" point guards as well. You're not going to get too much rebounding from them. Although Kyle Lowry is fantastic at boxing out bigger guys, one of the best to ever do it. But you don't want to rely on Kyle Lowry to be matching up against centers, or Pascal Siakam to be going up against guys like Joel Embiid. That's not going to go too well in the long run. Let's be honest. That might be a solution to get things going and something you can do throughout periods of games when the offense is stagnant, but I don't know if it's the solution for the Raptors as a whole. I'm going to leave one thing to kind of put it into perspective, just so people aren't so down on the Raptors. I know they've started the season bad, and I've said everything about how their defense or their offense isn't fantastic. Their offense is terrible. They have played a number of good teams. You look at who they've played. They've played the 76ers, the Celtics, the Pelicans, and Spurs. Don't think the Spurs will be in the playoff mix, but they just beat the Clippers. They're clearly a good enough team to win on any given night. When you take it back to last year, the Raptors weren't a team that were dominant because of their ability to beat teams above 500. They were fine. 7th in the NBA in terms of their record against teams over 500 at 16-15, and 3rd in the conference. So that's good. They were still a top team. But what separated them from other teams was the fact they were 37-4 against teams below 500. 37-4. And to start the season, they haven't really played any of those kind of bottom feeders, which I don't know if there are any bottom feeders to start the year. Maybe the Pistons, Timberwolves, Grizzlies without Ja Morant, but there's not a ton of them, so they're not going to be able to get that same kind of record, which leaves me to think that even if they get back to where they were, which I don't see them getting back to because they've lost to Ibaka and Gasol, Baines isn't playing the same way he was, Siakam's not playing the same way he was, They won't be able to get a 37-4 record against teams below 500 anymore because they're not going to be playing against the Atlanta Hawks, the Detroit Pistons, the New York Knicks, the Cleveland Cavaliers of last year. So that is a concerning thing. It's perspective because it means that when they do come up against teams that are below 500, maybe they're going to turn things around. Like I said at the start of the video, I'm not giving up yet, but it is time to consider other options. Just consider it. One of them has to be considering trading the greatest Raptor of all time, Chris Paul without the Banana Boat crew, arguably the most underrated player of the decade, one of the best point guards in the league currently and has been for a decade, Kyle Lowry. You have to consider it. I'm just saying. I think Masai Ujiri would do him well and trade him to a team like the Clippers, a team that's going to contend for a championship. I can't see him shipping him off to New York or one of those teams, although New York look all right at the moment, but you know what I mean. I just can't see him shipping him off to a team that are going to be terrible and are going to go against Kyle Lowry's wishes. I know he did it to DeRozan, but Lowry, could he do that to Lowry? You would have to be very, very cold-hearted to do that to the greatest Raptor of all time. So you look at potential options like the Clippers and maybe an outsider like the Pelicans who have plenty of players to give up. Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball, those kind of guys. JJ Redick for the contract. He's been terrible, but he's still got some kind of value if he can get his shooting back up. It makes me think the Pelicans could be interested. Lonzo Ball hasn't re-signed. They might want to win now because guys like Zion, Brandon Ingram. So that could be an interesting option. The Clippers have the contracts. Maybe a Luke Kennard. He's a younger player. Are the Raptors interested in him? I don't know the details, but those are just some options, some potential teams. You just have to consider it with Lowry. He's coming up to the end of his contract. He's an unrestricted free agent, which means he walks for free if he doesn't re-sign next year. So maybe try to get something while you can. And I'm sure there would be teams willing to offer a lot, or they should be willing to offer a lot, because he either guarantees a playoff spot, or for the Clippers, he probably makes them the favorites. I say he would make them the favorites. He's that good. And to the final option before I go, there's the outside option. The Raptors have a terrible year, maybe a mysterious injury, which I'm not hoping for, happens to one of their star players. All of a sudden, they wind up with a top 5 to 10 pick in a stacked draft. They get a talented player that way. He adds to the rotation. He adds something. Immediately a fantastic player like we've seen in the years past with some of those stacked drafts. Then all of a sudden free agency comes around. They sign someone like Victor Oladipo, Kyle Lowry resigns, and the team is retooled and ready to go again. There's still the semblance of a team that went 53-19 last year. It's a bit scattered at the moment. Things aren't looking great, but there's still the semblance. There's still the players necessary to make a deep playoff run if they can retool and rebuild on the fly, which if there's anyone to do it, it's Masai Ujiri. That's an option. It's an outside option. It's something that I wouldn't get your hopes too high up about because the chances are a bit low, but that's an option that I'm going to leave out. And with that, I'm going to end the video. If there was a team that would rebuild within half a year, it would be Toronto. So that's what I'm going to end the video with. If you did enjoy, a like would be greatly appreciated. Other than that, I'll catch you next time.